Nearly the best hand cannon DPS in PvE and multiple ways to 2-tap in PvP. This is the Midnight Coup, the revamped adaptive kinetic hand cannon for Into the Light that has the most viable perk options I have ever seen on a weapon in Destiny 2. There's a lot of talks about what works and what doesn't, as well as a big chance you're missing out on 50% of your damage if you're not set up right, but today I've got tested answers with a literal web of perk synergy to unravel, recommendations based off what kind of player you are, and then final god rolls which are also timestamped below. Okay, for real, just listen to some of the stuff we're talking about. Gaining Radiant and Restoration through a kinetic weapon, 2-taps that don't need an elimination, instant activation of multiple perks in just one shot. Midnight Coup is wild. Starting with the stats, Midnight Coup has the highest aim assist and airborne effectiveness out of all 21 current legendary adaptive hand cannons, but it also has some of the lowest recoil direction and some pretty mediocre stability and range stats. This creates some really big trade-offs that I think are immediately going to split opinions on how good this hand cannon actually feels. So the good here is real good with that aim assist, but one of the biggest complaints I hear is over the range stat, so I want to address that first. Once again, much like heliocentric, when you really look into it, the difference is extremely minimal. Take a look at Rose, what I think is currently one of the most popular competitors against Midnight Coup. The aim down sight's damage fall off starting distance is only 0.4 meters in difference. To me, that's not a big deal, and in practice, I felt this too. I ran a lot of rolls with higher handling and stability, and as long as I was hitting close to 55 in my final range value, I felt golden in those medium distance engagements that adaptive hand cannons are built for. The other thing that throws people off, and what I think is the more divisive factor, is the base 80 recoil direction and the visuals of this massive gun recoiling to the right of your screen. No, really, when I was making the thumbnail, the weapon was so big that I had to put two images together if I wanted the whole thing flat. So that bounce feels intense, like the original Year 1 D2 feel, and the recoil pattern can be a bit extreme as well. But I've got some pretty unusual recommendations for it. Check this out. The 80 recoil pattern does look pretty ridiculous, but you'll see that with just a counterbalance mod, you've cleaned up that pattern quite a bit without giving up any barrel stats, and it's almost indistinguishable from 100 if you went for arrowhead break. So ultimately, I'm going to recommend counterbalance for mouse and keyboard players if you don't like that base pattern, but for controller, I've landed somewhere entirely different. That high aim assist will certainly feel good everywhere, but thanks to reticle friction and how sticky the Midnight Coup feels, to me, it is very comfortable to shoot through that visual recoil on controller. As I was testing all these different rolls, I would get into these accuracy streaks thinking I was using one of the higher recoil direction numbers, but when I go to check my roll, it was just one of the ones at base 80. It was really frustrating to me to have such a dichotomy between what was on paper versus my experience with the weapon until I noticed the 80 recoil pattern is nearly identical to the visual recoil direction that the Midnight Coup kicks. There's certainly a chance that if you're on mouse and keyboard you'll like this too, but on controller, the combination of that matching the direction of the visual bounce with reticle friction and high aim assist felt like it frequently threw me right onto those headshots. Every player will be different, but I thought my experience here was really interesting. As we get into the perks, there is one more stat that blew my mind: the massive damage this weapon puts out in PvE. It is neck and neck with even Warden's Law. There are two things going on here. One, this is a kinetic hand cannon. Kinetics get an automatic 10% extra damage on non-shielded enemies, and thanks to Mossy's damage spreadsheet, we can see that hand cannons have incredibly good PvE combatant scalers too, sometimes reaching near sidearm levels of DPS depending on the enemy type if you've invested into your reload stat. That's just at base for kinetic hand cannons. We haven't even made it to the perks yet, and that leads us to the second thing going on with damage and into where our perk breakdown begins and we start combining things. First, another combo I want to talk about is Manscaped joining with the Testicular Cancer Society to talk about men's health and cancer awareness. As a dad, full-time videographer, and content creator, my mind can get caught up in the day-to-day and I forget to think of my personal health for the future. So I was excited when Manscaped reached out to sponsor this video and remind us all how important men's health and cancer prevention screening is. Manscaped sent me the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra Trimmer, which is both cordless and waterproof. Crafted to transcend the boundaries of your typical trim achieved with the trimmer blade, the Lawnmower's foil blade is designed to leave you with a finish that's irresistibly sleek and utterly bare. It's got a powerful LED light so you can shave with confidence navigating through tricky regions, as well as a constant RPM motor that will keep you from experiencing any loss in performance as the battery begins to wane. So visit manscaped.com/TSC to learn how to check yourself for early signs of cancer and use my promo code LEGOLAY for 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com. Okay, back to Midnight Coup. I have like 15 unique combinations to look for and about 3 that you should absolutely avoid. If you enjoy the info as we go, think about hitting that subscribe button. Let's start with the ultimate PvE damage hack, Explosive Payload, and it's in the third column, a rare find that interacts with a ton of perks in the fourth column. Explosive Payload lessens your damage slightly in PvP, but it is highly sought after due to the unlimited range on half your damage and the way it flinches your opponents. But we're going to stay focused on the PvE perks for a bit here because of how wildly different everything operates between the two places. So in PvE, Explosive Payload works out to be a free damage boost, most of the time. As you've probably heard, it evens out to an extra 15% damage on body shots, but it also works out to around 10% extra on Midnight Coup crits. Bungie just changed that hand cannon crit multiplier, so it might not be exactly 10%, but probably along those lines. Between just being kinetic and explosive payload, that's a 21% buff with great intrinsic combatant damage before we get to the fourth column damage. Only one other kinetic hand cannon has explosive payload in the third column like this, and that's Fatebringer. But the highest its damage get in the fourth column is 15% from Frenzy. Still a great combo and one I would absolutely be fine with on Fatebringer or Midnight Coup, but we have multiple options to take the damage even higher here. The controversial one first, explosive payload and kinetic trimmers. Again, you've probably heard now that the double impact from explosive payload does not count towards the 6 shots you need to activate kinetic trimmers, but each of these on their own is still a huge amount of extra damage. Kinetic trimmers is still influenced by the 10% kinetic buff as well as the naturally good hand cannon combatant scaler, putting the kinetic trimmers damage on Midnight Coup next to some special weapons level of damage. Showing my cards early, I actually don't like kinetic trimmers much due to requiring all 6 shots being on one target. I'm sorry, Fallout, but I'd like everyone to keep in mind that these Into the Light weapons will be able to be enhanced in the future, bringing kinetic trimmers to only needing 5 shots. I still feel the same way about it though. The real damage stacking comes from explosive payload combined with One for All or Desperate Measures. Rampage and Desperate Measures put out similar damage, but Rampage is slightly more total damage at 33.1%, with Desperate Measures topping out at 30%, but I'm going to come back to Desperate Measures because I actually prefer that one for a lot of activities. Then One for All tops them all with a 35% damage buff. This 35% buff from One for All stacked on the 10% crit buff from explosive payload stacked on the 10% buff as a kinetic weapon is what puts Midnight Coup through the roof when it comes to PvE damage. Even Enhanced Surrounded's 47% buff on a crafted Zalu's Bane with explosive payload doesn't hit the damage levels that Midnight Coup does due to Midnight's kinetic bonus putting it over the top. Wild. The only hand cannon that appears to top this damage is Warden's Law, and at that point it comes down to exactly the situation you're using the weapon and if you can hit those crits as frequently with the 2 burst. So I'm loving Midnight's damage in PvE, but there is one really important thing to consider, and that's that explosive payload does not get buffed by the Hunter Exotic Lucky Pants. So if you're using this for boss damage, specifically with Lucky Pants, you should not be running explosive payload, which pretty much slots Wardens for you with bosses. But even then, I wouldn't pass up Midnight because there is so much more. Like the instant activation of both One for All and Rampage ×3 through either Firefly or Explosive Payload. While Explosive Payload didn't work on kinetic trimmers, if you've got enemies grouped up with just one shot, you can proc One for All or Max Rampage. Same thing goes for Firefly, and what's really cool about Firefly is thanks to the Flint Striker perk in your seasonal artifact mod, you can get Radiant and activate One for All or Rampage ×3 at the same time. time. The Firefly explosion is solar and counts for any other solar abilities as well. That's an instant 48.5% buff on One For All when combined with Radiant, which is insane from just a single bullet. But this is where things get weird. Explosive payload is like built-in Radiant, so why not just run explosive payload with One For All, and then you could stack Radiant or other empowering buffs on top of the built-in weapon perks? Well, Firefly does have one extra thing going for it outside its instant activation and explosion, and that's a plus 50 reload speed for 6 seconds after it goes off. This essentially makes Outlaw obsolete, since the only extra thing it's going to do here is a very small reload duration multiplier. So something like Firefly and One For All has a ton of potential over Frenzy, as you get a much higher damage boost and your reload is already maxed out with Firefly. Not dissing Frenzy though, even with all that, Frenzy's still giving you max handling for staying in the fight and is fantastic if you don't have enemies around or you don't want to worry about balancing timers. Between all the options we've already listed, I feel like Enlightened Action falls way short for PvE, but I think Shoot to Loot and Attrition Orbs could be great selections with Kinetic Trimmers for utility in harder content. I usually don't think much of Attrition Orbs, but it is procced by the explosion from Kinetic Trimmers. I know, it's weird, you can't activate it with third column perks, but the explosions from Kinetic Trimmers do affect third column perks. Yeah, this web is difficult. Let's talk Desperate Measures as we go into PvP, as I want to cover it for both PvE and PvP at the same time. I am so surprised to see the hate for Desperate Measures when it is one of the easiest huge damage perks I have seen in a while. Lots of comparison to Golden Tricorn, but this is not Golden Tricorn for 3 reasons. 1, yes, there are different levels of the perk, but you do not need a weapon kill at all to get to ×3. Just melee or grenade kills. In fact, you don't need powered ability kills at all. Just a normal melee works in both PvE and PvP, which happens all the time. Then 2, once you get ×3 up, you can constantly refresh it with just weapon kills like Rampage. An even better comparison is Sword Logic, since you can get the higher damage part of the perk and keep it rolling with normal kills. The timer on Desperate Measures is also 7 seconds as opposed to Rampage's 4.5 second timer. So Desperate Measures has a lot more uptime between enemies, or just more uptime to lay into a single boss when you're at ×3 and can't refresh the perk. The third reason this isn't Golden Tricorn is because, and let me emphasize this, you do not need to have this weapon equipped to activate Desperate Measures. This is one of the best quality of life perk benefits I have ever used, and is one of the reasons I am so surprised to see people dissing the perk. I can be doing anything else in the game, and if I happen to get a double grenade kill, double melee kill, or just knock out 2 enemies in a row real fast, I know I can swap to my Midnight Coup and have 30% damage buff ready to go and ready to be refreshed as long as I'm getting a kill every 7 seconds. I love this perk, and even though I can't run explosive payload on my Lucky Pants with it, I can still run Firefly Desperate Measures, have explosions and 100 reload speed on kills with that refreshing 30% damage buff all the time. In fact, it pairs great with Lucky Pants because if I get the double melee kill, I have to be on another weapon to even get Lucky Pants rolling with it. You have to switch weapons to start Lucky Pants, so in some ways, it's perfect. Now let's break it down in PvP. If you're running a solar subclass and get one of your melees with a powered melee, you're now Radiant on top of a 30% buff, giving you a refreshable 2-tap with an adaptive hand cannon all the way through 10 Resil. Now, you'll never use this in trials. I mean, I guess you could if you get the first 2 players down and you have the third all to yourself, so it's possible. But getting an adaptive 2-tap rolling against any Resil in 6s without ever getting a weapon kill? That feels wrong. There are a few swashbuckler adaptive hand cannons out there that can do this, mainly looking at spare rations, but the timer isn't as long as you'll have on Midnight Coup with Desperate Measures to keep the 2-tap going. And this isn't the only 2-tap. We've got a 2-tap possible with a single bullet and no kills required through One For All. Now, I'm not encouraging people to do this as an S-tier option, but I was heavily surprised at how frequently One For All was up in 6s for me. You've got 3 seconds between hits, you only need 3 hits, and you're gifted a 35% weapon buff. With either Radiant or just 1 orb wearing 3 Surge mods, you're at a 10-second 2-tap, and you hardly did anything to get there. Just like PvE, you could even run explosive payload with One For All to proc the 3 hits in one single shot with the explosive hit. That's a bit less damage, but I'm pretty sure it's enough to still 2-tap while Radiant. Explosive shouldn't take off that much. I just can't believe it's such a simple activation in PvP. Even if you're not Radiant, that's just a ton of damage. We've also got the classic moving target and opening shot for PvP. I really like this combo, and I particularly love moving target taking the aim assist to 100 without needing any weapon or armor mods at all. Remember though, if you don't care about the aim assist or max it out in other ways, moving target also gives you faster ADS movement speed, which I've grown to really value in Crucible duels. Zen Moment is also a great dueling perk that has been the highlight for a lot of people. I'm going to be the complete oddball here, but I'll back it up with the facts I can. I want to like Zen Moment here. I loved it on the Summoner, but outside of the flinch reduction, which only comes into play when you're getting shot at, all the bounce and shake reduction that Zen Moment does is completely visual. It does not change anything about your shot other than what it appears to you as. With a controller and the type of player I am, I felt like reticle friction was doing enough work that I did not have to invest in that visual reduction. I actually played worse without the visual indicators because I was compensating for the weapon incorrectly. On mouse and keyboard, it feels like this would be much less of an issue, but it's something that I'd like everyone to think about as they approach Zen Moment. It's not going to do the same for you on every weapon because the visual bounce and shake on weapons are all different. I want to mention Frenzy before I get to God Rolls too. I don't personally like running it in PvP, but it's starting to rise in popularity for a lot of players due to how much longer duels are lasting without special weapons. The thing is, for a player like me, I'm a very do or don't, 0 or 100. I slay all of them or I'm dead in 5 seconds. Frenzy needs 12 seconds to activate, and I just don't think that's worth it for no change in optimal TTK over perks like opening shot or even the 2-tap possibilities. That's just me though. Okay, God rolls. Sticking with PvP, I'll split the rolls up into a roll for those who want to reduce visual shake and enemy interference, those who are going for straight dueling or are just average skill players, and then 2-tap madness. Regardless of which you choose, I like going by Ill Physics' method of the stat stairs. If you haven't seen him play with a hand cannon, I highly encourage you to do so. I'm usually a big range fan, as range tightens your accuracy cone, and I didn't think this trick would translate as much to controller, but he got me on this method, and nearly every time I try it out, it ends up being my favorite roll. You just put handling over stability and stability over range, and make the little staircase. The key for me here was doing it while keeping range between 50 and 60. That was just the sweet spot. So I'm going for Fluted Barrel for the massive handling stat, Accurized Rounds for range, and Stability Masterwork. If you want to even out those stairs a bit more, I think Corkscrew is a great option, but it's such a minimal increase in range I did not notice the difference between 50 and 55. The 10 extra handling I'll feel all the time. The first perk combo for those who really want a more stable visual experience would be Explosive Payload and Zen Moment. As I mentioned in the perk, Zen Moment is just visual outside of flinch reduction, but this cleans things up for you and lets you dish out extra flinch and extra damage at range with Explosive Payload. Personally, I prefer the dueling combo of moving target and opening shot, as it lets me move faster while ADS, brings me to 100 aim assist, and gets that important first shot right on target. For the 2-taps while Radiant, you can go One For All or Desperate Measures. I like them both pretty equally as they're activated in such different ways, but I think Desperate Measures is definitely the easier one to get up, as you don't even need to use the weapon to get it rolling. I think I preferred moving target for both, but Explosive Payload and Firefly are also good options, particularly Explosive Payload and One For All with the way you can proc it so quickly when players group up. For the PvE Midnight Coup God roll, oh my gosh, is there a bad combo here? They said Explosive Head and Kinetic Tremors was bad, and it's still a banger combo thanks to all the individual damage each perk is doing. Here's the best rolls I've landed on. For the barrels and mag, I'm almost always going to want Fluted, Flared Magwell, and a Reload Masterwork. It's just the most utility stats you can get and feels great, but there are 2 reasons not to go this route. 1, you're pairing with Firefly and One For All, or 2, you are using Explosive Payload with Frenzy. So for Firefly, you might want Firefly with One For All just for the explosions, but the real reason is because you lose half your damage if you run Lucky Pants with Explosive Payload. So Firefly it is if you're that setup. Then if you're running Explosive Payload but you use Frenzy, Frenzy's gonna max out your handling and reload a lot of the time, and this combo is definitely worth your time as it's still a ton of damage and you don't have to pay attention to any timers. For either of these, I'd swap Flared Magwell for Alloy Magazine, as that is a reload multiplier that can go beyond the 100 reload stat from Firefly or Frenzy. My personal choice for a PvE Midnight Coup to use on any of my characters would be Explosive Head and One For All or Desperate Measures. It depends on the content. If it's harder, then One For All. If it's a little more low-key, then Desperate Measures, because kill chaining is so easy. Either one is great, and when I looked at my final kill counters, I was pretty much even on both of these roles. To close out, in PvP, am I going to keep using this? Yes, I am. I love the aim assist, and both One For All and Desperate Measures are hilarious. In PvE, will I replace my Warden's Law with this? On my Hunter? No. Lucky Pants simply exists. But on my Titan and Warlock, I'm going to keep these rolls around. It's the only hand cannon that's been able to take Warden's Law out of my hands, and we don't know what Enhanced Desperate Measures is even gonna do yet, or what could happen to the 2-burst hand cannons in final shape. If you made it to the end of the video, drop a riptide in the comments, and if you enjoyed it, feel free to stick around. This has been Lego LaFlash. Until next time, GG.